Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talk with Sherry Knazan, the Jewish educator and proprietor of Love Letters Bakery, which she operates out of her kosher St. Louis Park kitchen. We talk about why she started the business, the great story of where the name comes from, and taking classes to get her Ph.D. on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Sherry Knazan, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. You have no idea.
Oh, thank you. We're excited to talk to you. I'm so glad you're so excited. That's great. You are the owner and founder of Love Letters Bakery in your St. Louis Park condo. Tell me a little bit about what Love Letters Bakery is, when it started, how you got started in this business.
Sure. Okay. So Love Letters Bakery is a cottage bakery, meaning that I have a cottage food production license and I'm allowed to bake in my kitchen. And then I don't deliver yet, but people come after they order, they come pick up in front of my condo on Friday afternoons. There's a specific time. And then I just go outside the condo and hand them their bag. So it's super easy pickup. And I started the bakery because I've been baking forever. I mean, the story behind the bakery is that my mother always baked. Okay. And she and my dad loved what she made. And of course, we were always the recipients of it. And I remember my cousins asking for Auntie Sil's, my mother's name was Sylvia, asking for Auntie Sil's brownies or her pies. She had a special way of wrapping her brownies in wax paper, each one individually. And they all, when they heard about this bakery, they all contacted me and said, oh, I remember Auntie Sil's brownies. So anyway, we have this legacy of my mother's baking. And when I realized that I could bake out of my condo, we moved here in June. I said, I talked with my sisters. I have two sisters who live here. And one of them had started baking during the pandemic. And she said, maybe we should start a bakery. She ended up deciding not to be a part of the baking. But I have to tell you, nobody ever does this alone. And she, while I am the sole baker and the sole owner, my entire family has participated in the launch of this bakery, which just started 4 weeks ago.
Right. I mean, it's the kind of thing, like, nobody can start a business solely on their own. There is always other people that have to be part of it just to keep the trains running in the rest of your life, on time.
Yes, exactly. But even more than the fact that you can't do it alone, I'd never run a business before. Okay. I didn't know how to set up a website. And my youngest son, Alex, and my daughter-in-law, Alyssa, who are living in our house in California, where we just came from, they're the ones that set up our website. I actually consulted with a business consultant here, the daughter of a friend, and who runs her own business. And then, of course, the patience of my husband with stuff spread all over the kitchen, the tasters, my kids, my other sister. My sister Diane created the name Love Letters Bakery because we did a whole brainstorming and a whole contest within our family on what should we name it. And we didn't like any of the names. And finally she said, Mom and Dad's letters. So that's a whole story in itself. If you want to hear it, I'm happy to tell it.
Were they prolific letter writers back and forth?
They met in 1942 and got married in 1943. Okay. And my dad was already in the United States Army. He was from Winnipeg and had come down to Canada, from Canada to study in the United States because my Bobby didn't want him in the Canadian Army. But after because Canada was in the war before the United States.
Oh, yes, they were. That's very true.
World War II. So after he graduated, he met my mom and he enlisted in the United States Army. So right.
Which I'm sure thrilled your Bobby.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, he couldn't get away from it. And so my mom and dad were together when he was in basic training, but then he got shipped in 1944 to India. And he was there for over 2 years and they wrote letters every single day. I'm not exaggerating. So there was in our lives, there was always these big boxes of mom and dad's letters that no one ever opened.
Really?
In the basement. They were married for 63 years before my dad died in 2007, and no one ever opened the letters. They were packaged up. You can see a picture of them on my website. And they just were there. But after my mom died in 2017, and then the pandemic started, my two sisters who lived here said, maybe we should open those letters and start reading them. And they did.
Wow.
And they started, and they found out so many interesting things about our family, and they've started sorting through them. And so when my sister Diane said, why don't we call this Love Letters Bakery? Mom loved to bake. Mom and dad wrote letters to each other. It just all kind of fell into place.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's such a cool story.
It is a good story.
That's really good. And we'll have a link to the to your website. The picture of the letters is on the About page.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful website. Shout out to your son and daughter-in-law. They did a really nice job.
You betcha. I told them that I would mention them, and they'll be very excited.
They did an excellent job. It's a great looking, very clean website. But the pictures of those sort of, I guess, bales of letters.
Yeah, bundles of letters.
That's
right. Yes. And so I think that I'm looking at one of them now, and I think I've never read a letter. That should also be, no, because, when they first started talking about reading them, I wasn't here. They both live here. Mm-hmm. It was in the very beginning of the pandemic. And I said, I have this funny feeling about reading about what they're writing to each other. I mean, the honest truth is my sister said, Mom's letters aren't as interesting because all she writes is, I love you, I love you, I love you. And big red kisses, which, believe it or not, they must have made great lipstick in the 40s because the red still is on the letters.
Wow.
But my dad's letters were more interesting because he was writing as much as he could without whatever the censors were taking out or redacting. He wrote about what was happening and people that he met and some of the things that he was doing. He was on a base in India, supporting the planes that went over the hump to Asia.
Okay.
Yeah, that was his. He was working. He had a degree in psychology, so I think he was working with other soldiers, and he wasn't actually a mechanic.
Okay, gotcha.
Anyway, so that's that whole story, which is like so cool. So now these letters are a big part of our family.
That's so great. I mean, and the fact that you use that family story to name the bakery is really cool. It's a really nice touch.
We think it kind of honors my parents. Obviously, they don't know, but all the other family members have said, and friends who knew my parents have said, what a great way to honor your parents. Too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
So the recipes that you use when you create the menu each week, are they your mom's recipes or are they other things you've developed over time, a combination of both? How do you do your development?
Right. Okay. So I love that you use the word developing because I'm really not a scientific baker at all.
Okay.
I bake what I've always baked, not to say that I don't try new recipes, which of course I do, because I try to add, my goal is to try to add new things to my menu, but I don't think I'm even that creative a baker. The pies are definitely my mom's.
Okay.
I make the same pie crust that she does. It's a par pie crust recipe that I think everybody in the 1940s used, using Crisco. So I don't use butter in that.
Well,
but
that's why I haven't had it, but that's why it's so good. It's because you use shortening instead.
Oh yes, absolutely.
That's a given.
But that's what all the Jewish women cooked with in those days. They all used Crisco shortening. So, but the cookies I've developed myself. My son, Alex, the one who helped with the website, who did the website, he's the one that even when he was a little boy said, Mom, you really should sell your cookies. You really should sell your chocolate chip cookies. So
he was ahead of his time.
He was ahead of his time, even as a little boy. That's for sure. So I think some of the recipes are from my family, but others my challah recipe, by the way, which seems to be getting rave reviews. It comes from my friend with the same name as you. Her name is Lonnie.
Okay.
And she's one of my closest friends from where I grew up in Michigan. And that was her recipe, which has spread around. And actually with that recipe, a number of years ago, there was something called the Sonoma County Harvest Festival. I lived in Northern California, above San Francisco, and I entered the challah, and I won first place for it. That's the only time I've ever won for anything I baked.
So this is an award-winning challah,
This
is what you're
is an
saying.
award-winning challah. And if you ask the people who've bought it so far, I have had a few people say, I don't really want to brag, but
this is your chance.
This is my chance to brag.
Yeah, please.
So they've said that this is the best challah they've ever tasted. This is not to say that other people don't make great challah, but this was their opinion on my challah.
Well,
so you probably should try it, Lonnie.
I think so. That's an awfully good recommendation. I'll say that.
Right. It is.
So how do you, obviously there's a lot of things you could put out each week on the menu for people to order. How do you decide each week because obviously you can't have everything all the time. Otherwise it just sort of feels like that would spread you too thin.
That is actually a great question. And I think I'm learning how to do this as, again, the bakery is 4 weeks old. So I'm not only a brand new business owner, but I'm brand new at this whole bakery. So I started out thinking I would just offer a few things each week because I only bake on Thursdays and Fridays.
Okay.
And then, if somebody knew that I also offered something else and they wanted to contact me, I could decide whether I would bake that. But I think I'm moving into a little different mode. The bakery will be closed for a week next week because I will be studying. But after I come back, I think I'm going to try something different and offer more smaller things weekly, always my challah, and then do the things like pies and cakes as more special orders.
Okay.
So, because that doesn't seem to be the thing that people are ordering the most in my, again, 4-week experience.
Sure.
Is challah every week, and then cookies. Those are the things that people seem to want the most at this point from me.
Well, you got to stick with the classics.
Exactly.
Plus, if that's what people are ordering,
right.
Just play the hits. Right.
Challah and chocolate chip cookies. How can you lose, right?
That's awesome. So you mentioned the cottage food license. We talked before I started recording that there are a number of people whom I've talked to on Who the Folk over for almost 4 years we've been doing the show who have cottage food licenses and who have, who you've talked to and sort of, heard their stories about setting up their business. Has that been helpful to you? Have those other, the other individuals doing this kind of thing, has that been helpful to you in starting up what you're trying to do?
Well, actually, I've never talked personally with any of them.
Okay.
I listened to your podcast of them.
Okay.
And I did email with Uriel Lewis because I had to tell him that his father was the rabbi that married us. And I bought some of his bread, but I've never talked with anybody, so I don't really know how people have set things up.
Okay.
I've looked at websites. I've gotten ideas from them. I've decided how I wanted it. But I think in the end, it's got to be what fits with each individual person. And so far, what I'm doing is fitting with me. Plus, I really want to listen to my customers.
Sure.
So, here's a perfect example. So I started out by offering cookies, and you had to buy a minimum of 12 because that's how much a recipe made for me with the size that I make. And I didn't want all these cookies left over because I didn't want to eat them or have them sitting around my house, or I'm sure my family would have appreciated it. But anyway, and I don't have a space to store things.
Sure.
So I decided this week, well, you know what? And this was at the suggestion of one of my customers, 12 is really a lot. I would buy them if you offered 6. So I bumped it back down and said, okay, now the minimum is 6 and not 12. And that was on this week. And I got 2 or 3 people who ordered 6 cookies. So I'm thinking that was really a good move. And that's really how I'm learning.
So you mentioned that you're taking next week off. So when when people are listening to this, based on when you and I are talking, by the time people listen to this, you will be off the week this comes out, because you're studying. So the bakery is kind of a new business for you, as you mentioned, but also, I'd reached out to you a couple weeks ago. Here's a little behind the scenes for people. I'd reached out to you a couple weeks ago. You weren't able to talk until we are now because you had a paper to finish up because you are finishing a Ph.D. program.
Right.
While you are trying to launch a business. So tell me about the Ph.D. program and where you're hoping to take that once you're Dr. Knazan.
Yeah, right. If that should happen, okay. I'm not actually at the end of it. I'm sort of one of those lifelong students.
Okay.
And I fell into a master's program at Spertus Institute for Jewish Learning and Leadership in Chicago 20 years ago. I had some funding from a program I was involved in San Francisco, and we were to use it to study. I used it to take a class to start a master's program, and then just kept going until I finished my master's. Okay. By the way, I'm a Jewish educator, and that's my field, and I'm still working in it.
Okay.
So this all kind of made sense. And so then I finished the master's and said, okay, I think I'll just audit classes because I don't really I'm sort of near the end of my career. I don't really need to get a doctorate. I'm not going to teach in a university. Why would I do this? So I audited for a year or so. And then one of my professors said, I don't know why you don't just apply for the PhD program. And I thought, well, why not? Really, why not?
Okay.
So I did. I mean, my family truly probably thought I was nuts. Why are you doing this? Some of them said, oh, wow, isn't that terrific? And some of them said, this is crazy. Why are you doing this? But I have loved every moment of it. And I'm sort of at the end of my coursework. I will then have to take comps. And then I will have to write a thesis. So I'm not going to be Dr. Knazan next week or even maybe next year. Okay. But it does take time out of my life, and I do dedicate time to it. So that was why we couldn't speak till today. And I'm happy to say I turned my paper in on time yesterday.
Well, that is excellent. I'm glad that got done on time.
Yes.
So being a Jewish educator, it's a big field. Obviously, there's a lot you can do with that sort of background. Is there an area in particular that you specialize with?
Well, I've taught for many, many years in synagogue schools.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I am teaching here at Temple Israel.
Oh, excellent.
So before I moved here, I interviewed at several places and decided to not only join Temple Israel as a member, but to teach in their Jewel program. So I teach on Sunday mornings. We were in person. We've been on Zoom for the past month or so. And then I teach Tuesday afternoons on Zoom, a Hebrew class.
Okay.
And then I also still teach a California class from a synagogue I was with. I still teach, because Zoom allows us to do that, sure. I still teach a Hebrew class through them. So I've been involved in lots of aspects of Jewish education, always teaching in a religious school program, also working heavily in family education, developing and working in family programs. I've worked with grief work through something called a grief and growing camp that we have in the Bay Area, working with families or people who have lost somebody in their lives. I've worked in a program getting speakers to synagogues on Jewish topics. So sort of run the whole the whole circle of Jewish education.
Okay.
And so I've probably been doing that since I moved to California, which was in the late 70s.
Okay. Well, what ages are you teaching at Temple?
I teach 6th grade on Sunday mornings.
Okay.
And then the Hebrew class on Tuesday is 5th grade, and my California Hebrew class is 4th grade.
Okay.
So I kind of like those older elementary grades. Challenging, very challenging.
In a good way, I assume?
I hope.
Well, you keep doing it, so I would assume you like it.
It's a great age. You can have wonderful discussions with kids who are in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really like that. I really like that age. The challenges come with pre-adolescence. Sometimes all of that kind of stuff adds into to making teaching. You always have to be on your feet. You always have to be doing that dance and figuring out what to do. So.
How have you adjusted as a teacher? And I know there's a lot of, anecdotal stuff out there, depending on, what you read. Teaching in the pandemic being so, becoming so online focused for obvious reasons. I think people sort of get why we've had to largely make that shift. But how has it been for you as a teacher adjusting to that new reality?
That's also another good question. I vacillate. I vacillate between when I'm in person in the class, because we taught for the whole first semester at Temple in person. When I'm in person, I really see the benefits of being in person, where the kids can have that social relationship with each other, where you can actually talk to your colleagues, where you can see more than just the one person you're teaching with, because I have co-teachers in all of my classes. But the thing about Zoom is that you've got the kids right there, and they're not distracted by their fellow students. Sometimes they're distracted by what's ever going on in their house, but or the room that they're in, or their pet, or whatever. But I haven't found it. So here's the thing: I'm not doing it full time.
Okay.
Teachers who are teaching full days in their classrooms, I'm sure, will tell you a different story.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I'm finding the Zoom teaching to be satisfying, and I'm finding the in-person teaching to be satisfying. So I haven't really felt, except for the colleague and the actual personal interaction, I haven't really felt that it's been such a negative thing for me personally.
Do you feel, and I'm interested, especially your afternoon classes after kids have had a full day, either particularly earlier in the pandemic where they had a full day of online schooling and then another, couple hours of online again. Is it hard to engage with students when it's that much online time?
I think they're tired. I think the Zoom fatigue is a real thing, more so for the kids than it is for me, because I'm coming in fresh to my class. My class last night it goes from 6 to 7. So for the kids in California, it's from 4 to 5. Mm-hmm. So they're literally right at the end of their days. This is the funny thing. Every kid is snacking because they've just gotten home from school.
Right.
So they're all eating something. And sometimes it's just like, I don't know, potato chips or a cookie, but I've had kids eat dinner. And so we have this joke like, okay, what's Samantha eating right now for dinner? And the whole time, the whole class makes me hungry because I can't eat, but I'm watching my kids eating their food. That becomes distracting, because if you're calling on a student to read from a flashcard or to read from the prayer or something, and they've just put a spoonful of spaghetti in their mouth, you're going to have to go on to the next student. So I really give them a lot of leeway in what they can do when they're on Zoom, because I realize they've just come from school all day and we're asking them to look at a screen for an hour.
Right. Right. And I think whether they're in person and then going to a screen, I mean, I know that like generations of Jewish kids have, went through the same experience, certainly for more time than an hour, after school, but, maybe it was the right way to do it way back when. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's right now. And I think it's good that there's adaptation happening by the communities in terms of how we educate kids.
Well, I actually think that's a whole nother topic that we can discuss another time, Lonnie, is I have a lot of opinions about Jewish education, where it's come from, where it's gone. I talked to people I've met here in Minneapolis who went to Talmud Torah 4 days a week, 5 days a week. I was never involved in anything like that, so I didn't have that experience. But I don't know what your background is, but I think that was the expectation. Now, with often both parents working, with kids involved in multiple sports and drama and art activities, they're not, and parents are not either saying this is a priority, Hebrew school is a priority, nor are kids saying this is what we really want to do, or we're doing it because we want to be with our friends, or all the multiple reasons why that worked or didn't work.
I'll tell you what my experience was. You mentioned you grew up in Michigan, so did I. And I was a day school kid in Michigan, in part because my mom didn't want to have to get me to Hebrew school, 3-4 days a week in the afternoon,
right?
Where it wasn't, super convenient to get me there. And so, now that we're here, we have one Talmud Torah graduate, one current Talmud Torah kid, and I was for a 2-year term on the board of Talmud Torah. So, yeah, I'm going to keep my own feelings to myself because I don't think it's totally relevant for this conversation. There's a lot of pros and cons. I think I will leave it at that. But I think it's a really interesting conversation that I think the Jewish community, whether it's independent schools like the Talmud Torahs of Minneapolis and St. Paul or the synagogue schools, are still trying to grapple with.
Right.
How to most effectively and efficiently and, with the most intention possible, Jewishly educate the kids, of the Twin Cities and beyond.
Well, again, this is such an emotion-laden topic. It really is. I teach fourth grade in my California class, and last week we're supposed to assign homework every week to these kids. We ask them only to spend 5 minutes a day, but you can't really learn Hebrew letters or how to read Hebrew if you're not at least looking at it more than once when you're meeting with me on Monday nights. If you don't look at it again till the next Monday, what are you going to remember? So
that's right.
I said to the kids, I'm going to remind you, I'm going to assign homework, and we have an online program. And one kid just looked at me and said, I have to tell you, Sherry, I'm playing 5 sports, and I'm involved in a play, and I do all kinds of other stuff, and I just don't have time. So what does this tell us? This kid is involved in 5 sports. How can anybody be involved in 5 sports? I have no idea. But his family has decided that what is important in his life is all of the other things, and he still comes to Hebrew school, but he just doesn't have time to do the homework. Happens to be a really good student.
Sure.
But so there's just so many more factors involved as the world changed from the model of what Hebrew school used to be like when I was younger, when you were younger, when our children went through it. Anyway, it's, again, very, very extensive topic, and one that I have a lot to say about, but not today.
No, we'll stick to the baking on this one, and we'll. Right. I'm sure there will be more time to talk about Jewish education at another time.
That'd be great.
And we will let you go because we know this is a baking week for you. But before we let you go, last 2 questions we end with. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
I've got to say my favorite Jewish holiday is Shabbat. It comes every week. It's a question that stumps kids sometimes on quizzes. It comes every week. I love to bake challah, and I love the fact that at the end of the day on Friday, I can take a deep breath and say, as I get ready to light candles and eat challah and drink wine, that it's like it's come. Shabbat has come, and it's a day to just step back and not do what we do every single day.
And honestly, I would hope you like to make challah, because otherwise you might have started the wrong business.
That's true. That's absolutely good point, Lonnie. That's a really good point.
Thank you. And what is, speaking of challah, what is your favorite Jewish food?
Probably challah.
Yeah.
I have to say that. I mean, I bake in 1 pound loaves. That's what I advertise. Mm-hmm. And, I'm embarrassed to say that we've been known, just my husband and I, to go through the entire loaf at a meal. So that's a lot. That's a lot of challah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's embarrassing about that at all.
Oh, because other people do it too?
Oh, yeah. You're not alone. Try.
Okay.
Listen,
Okay.
at least you have help. It's not just you polishing off a 1 pound challah.
That's true. Oh no, I don't think I could do it all by myself, but but I do have help. That's true.
That is good. Well, Sherry Knazan, thank you so much for joining me on this week's podcast. Lovelettersbakery.com is the place to go to order your delicious looking challah and other treats. And check the website. The menu is updated regularly there, and pickup instructions are there and all of that. But thank you for joining me. This was a blast.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.